Welcome to the Hauntline. We delve into the shadows, into the spaces between sanity and the abyss, where the unsettling whispers of the unknown become screams. Tonight, we explore a terror that is uniquely personal, utterly isolating. What if you were haunted by someone no one else could see? Someone who never spoke, never threatened, but whose mere presence could unravel your world? This is the story of the man in the blue suit. It began, as these things often do, subtly, almost dismissively. If you've ever felt a prickle on your neck, the uncanny sensation of being watched, only to turn and find nothing, then you've tasted the faintest appetizer to Arthur Penwright's unending feast of dread. Arthur Penwright was a man of routine, of spreadsheets and sensible shoes. 42 years old, an accountant for a mid-level firm, his life was a metronome of predictable ticks and talks. Gray suit, sensible tie, the 8:15 a.m. train, lunch at his desk, a tuna sandwich on whole wheat, no mayo. The extraordinary had no place in Arthur's carefully curated existence until it inserted itself, uninvited. It was a Tuesday. Raining, of course. One of those relentless, soul-dampening drizzles that makes the city streets weep. Arthur was in the daily grind, his usual coffee spot, waiting for his usual black Americano. The queue was long, the air thick with the smell of damp wool and burnt coffee. He was idly scanning the headlines on his phone, fiscal reports, market downturns, the usual balm for his anxious soul. That's when he saw him. Across the crowded cafe, seated at a small two-person table near the window, was a man. He was unremarkable at first glance, perhaps late 50s, early 60s. His hair was a neutral, thinning gray, slicked back from a high forehead. But it was the suit that caught Arthur's eye, however fleetingly. It was blue, not navy, not royal, but a peculiar, almost luminous azure. Impeccably tailored, it seemed out of place amidst the rumpled office attire and casual wear of the other patrons. The man wasn't reading or on his phone or even looking out the window at the miserable weather. He was looking directly at Arthur, and he was smiling. It wasn't a warm smile, not a friendly one. It was fixed. A slight, almost imperceptible upward curve of the lips, but it didn't reach his eyes. His eyes were pale, watchful, and utterly devoid of expression. They were locked onto Arthur. Arthur, flustered, glanced away. Had he been staring, made the man uncomfortable? He fumbled for his wallet as his name was called. Cup in hand, Arthur risked another glance. The man was still there, still watching, still smiling that same static smile. A shiver, cold and unwelcome, traced its way down Arthur's spine. He hurried out, the bell above the door tinkling mockingly behind him. He didn't look back. Just a weirdo, he told himself. Cities are full of them. He tried to shake it off, attribute it to stress. End of quarter reports were looming. But the image of the man, the piercing blue of his suit, the unnerving stillness of his gaze, that smile, it lingered. An unwanted afterimage burned onto his retinas. The next day, the incident at the coffee shop had been relegated to the mental file cabinet Arthur reserved for odd urban encounters. He was immersed in a particularly labyrinthine spreadsheet, figures swimming before his eyes, when he felt it again. That prickling sensation. He looked up. Across the open plan office, near the water cooler, stood the man in the blue suit. Arthur's breath hitched. His heart hammered against his ribs like a trapped bird. It couldn't be. This was his office. Secure entry. How had he gotten in? The man was just there, leaning casually against the wall, arms folded. Same suit, same slicked back hair, same fixed, knowing smile directed squarely at Arthur. Arthur looked around wildly. His colleagues, Susan from marketing, David from HR, old Henderson from acquisitions, they were all engrossed in their work, oblivious. No one else seemed to see the azure figure by the cooler. Arthur blinked hard. Was he hallucinating? Sleep deprivation? He'd had a restless night, the image of the smiling man flickering behind his eyelids. He looked back. The man was gone, vanished as silently and suddenly as he'd appeared. Had he imagined it? It felt so real. The visual texture of the suit, the way the office light caught the slight sheen of his hair. Arthur's hand trembled as he reached for his mouse. He clicked, scrolled, tried to force the numbers back into focus, but the azure afterimage persisted. The sightings became more frequent. On his commute home, he'd see him standing on the station platform, just beyond the yellow line, smiling. Sometimes he'd be reflected in the train window, superimposed over the blur of the passing city, his gaze unwavering. Always silent, always watching, always that damn smile. Arthur started to change his routines. He took a different train. He found a new coffee shop, a sterile chain where everyone was glued to a laptop. He even tried working from home for a few days, feigning a cold. But the man in the blue suit was not so easily deterred. One evening, Arthur was making dinner, his usual solitary meal of grilled chicken and steamed broccoli. He turned from the stove to retrieve a plate, and there he was, standing in the hallway archway, bathed in the dim light from the living room. The blue of his suit seemed to absorb the shadows, making him appear almost to float. Arthur froze. This was his home, his sanctuary. The man just stood there, smiling. Arthur felt a primal fear, a suffocating dread that was becoming sickeningly familiar. "Who are you?" Arthur whispered, his voice raspy. "What do you want?" The man in the blue suit offered no reply. His smile, if anything, seemed to widen a fraction. He simply tilted his head, a slow, deliberate movement, as if curious, as if Arthur himself were the exhibit. Arthur backed away, heart pounding, until he hit the counter. He squeezed his eyes shut, praying, bargaining with a god he wasn't sure he believed in. Please, make him go away, please. When he opened them, the hallway was empty. But the silence in the apartment was different now. It was charged, heavy with an unseen presence. Arthur couldn't eat. He barely slept. The man in the blue suit was no longer an occasional, unnerving anomaly. He was a fixture in Arthur's rapidly deteriorating reality, and only Arthur could see him. Weeks bled into a nightmarish blur. Arthur's meticulous life began to unravel. At work, his concentration shattered. He made errors, missed deadlines. His usually tidy desk became a landscape of scattered papers and half-empty coffee cups. His colleagues exchanged concerned glances. His boss, Mr. Henderson, a portly man whose patience was as thin as his comb-over, called Arthur into his office. Henderson's words were couched in corporate euphemism. Performance issues, uncharacteristic lapses. Are you feeling all right, Arthur? But the subtext was clear. Get your act together or else. How could Arthur explain that he was being stalked by a phantom in a blue suit only he could perceive? That he felt a constant, unwavering gaze burning into him, even as he sat there, trying to focus on Henderson's concerned frown? He saw him then, of course. The man in the blue suit, standing just behind Henderson's right shoulder, that infuriating smile plastered on his face, as if enjoying Arthur's predicament. Arthur mumbled something about stress, personal problems. Henderson suggested he take some time off. A week. Recharge your batteries, Arthur. The week off was not a recharge. It was an intensification. Without the distraction of work, the man in the blue suit became his sole, unwelcome companion. He was there when Arthur woke up, standing at the foot of his bed. He was there when Arthur tried to read, his azure form reflected in the television screen. He was there in the bathroom mirror, a silent, smiling sentinel behind Arthur's own increasingly gaunt and wild-eyed reflection. Arthur started talking to him. At first it was pleas, then demands, then frustrated, rambling monologues. Why are you doing this? What do you want from me? Just say something, anything. Are you a ghost? A demon? Am I going mad? Is that it? Is this what madness feels like? The man in the blue suit never responded. He just watched and smiled. That smile, it was the cruelest part. It was a smile that suggested he knew something Arthur didn't. A cosmic joke to which Arthur was the punchline. He tried to find answers. Late nights were spent hunched over his laptop, typing frantic queries into search engines. Man only I can see. Silent watcher. Constant smiling apparition. The results were a predictable mix of paranormal forums filled with dubious anecdotes and clinical descriptions of psychosis, schizophrenia, delusional disorders. The medical explanations terrified him almost as much as the alternative. If the man was a figment of his imagination, then his mind was betraying him in the most profound way. If he was real, then what? His isolation was absolute. Who could he tell? His sister, Sarah, lived 3 states away, busy with her own family. His few work acquaintances were just that, acquaintances. He had no close friends. His life, so meticulously ordered, had no room for the kind of messy vulnerability this situation demanded. He was alone with his azure tormentor. He even considered calling the police once. He'd picked up the phone, finger hovering over the 9. But what would he say? There's a man in my apartment, but you won't be able to see him, and he doesn't do anything but smile. They'd send a different kind of professional, he was sure. The apartment became a pressure cooker. Arthur found himself pacing, muttering, jumping at shadows that weren't the shadow. He stopped answering his phone, letting calls from work and his sister go to voicemail. The curtains remained drawn, day and night, a futile attempt to block out the world, and perhaps the watcher. But the man in the blue suit wasn't an external phenomenon that light or darkness could affect. He was there, as constant as Arthur's own heartbeat, which now seemed to race perpetually. One afternoon, Arthur was sitting in his armchair, staring blankly at a wall. The man in the blue suit stood opposite him by the bookshelf. For hours, they'd been locked in this silent tableau. Arthur was exhausted, worn down to a raw nerve. Suddenly, a strange calm washed over him, a kind of weary resignation. He was tired of fighting it, tired of the fear. I've been thinking, if you're here to drive me insane, you're doing a remarkably good job. Top marks. But if you're something else, what is it? Is this a punishment? Did I do something? I've racked my brain. I'm an accountant. My sins are generally of omission, not commission. Unless you count that time I forgot to declare that extra 100 on my tax return in '08. The man in the blue suit remained impassive. His smile didn't waver. No? Not that? Okay. Maybe you're a guardian angel. A very creepy, very unhelpful guardian angel. Are you here to protect me from something? Because frankly, you're the thing I need protection from. Arthur leaned forward, his eyes, though bloodshot, held a new intensity. Or maybe you're just lonely. Is that it? Are you the spectral embodiment of loneliness, and you've latched onto the loneliest soul you could find? Because if so, congratulations, you picked a winner. He felt a bizarre connection in these one-sided dialogues, as if, by voicing his thoughts, he was somehow engaging with the silent figure, forcing a kind of relationship where none was offered. The man in the blue suit became his confidant, his confessor, his silent, smiling judge. He started to anticipate the man's presence, almost to expect it. The brief moments when he didn't see him felt empty, wrong. The dread was still there, a constant thrum beneath the surface, but it was now interwoven with a strange, perverse familiarity. The man in the blue suit was part of the fabric of his life, a dark, azure thread. He even started to notice details he hadn't before. The way the man's tie was perfectly knotted, a dim Windsor. The slight scuff on the toe of his otherwise immaculate black shoes, the almost imperceptible lines around his unblinking eyes. These observations felt like small victories, moments of clarity in the swirling fog of his fear. One day, Arthur was looking at his own reflection in the darkened television screen. Gaunt, unshaven, hair unkempt. He looked haunted, and then he saw him, the man in the blue suit, standing behind him in the reflection, perfectly composed. Arthur looked at his own miserable face, then at the serene, smiling visage of his tormentor, and Arthur tried to smile back. His facial muscles felt stiff, unused to the expression. It came out as a grimace, a pained caricature of mirth, but he held it. He stared at their two reflections, his grotesque smile and the man's unwavering one. For a fleeting moment, he felt a bizarre sense of camaraderie, or perhaps surrender. His week of leave ended. Arthur knew he couldn't go back to the office. Not yet, maybe never. He called in, his voice a monotone, and resigned. He cited health reasons. Henderson didn't press. Perhaps he was relieved. With no job to go to, no routine to anchor him, Arthur's world shrank to the confines of his small apartment and the constant, silent presence of the man in the blue suit. His savings began to dwindle. He ate sporadically, canned soup and stale bread. The outside world, with its demands and its oblivious, bustling crowds, felt like a distant memory. He started to conduct his life as if he had an audience, a very specific, very silent audience of one. When he ate, he imagined the man watching his table manners. When he read, he sometimes found himself subtly angling the book so the man could theoretically see the pages. He'd even catch himself narrating his actions internally, as if explaining them to his azure companion. Now I'm going to attempt to boil an egg. Let's see if I can manage that without incident today, shall we? The man was there when Arthur finally received a call from his sister, Sarah. Her voice was tinny through the speakerphone, laced with concern. "I'm here, Sarah. You sound terrible. Are you eating? Are you sick? Mr. Henderson called me. He said you resigned. What's going on, Arthur?" Arthur looked at the man in the blue suit, who stood near the window, the faint city light outlining his silhouette. His smile was, as ever, fixed. "I'm fine, Sarah. Just needed a break. Everything's under control." "It doesn't sound like it. Arthur, I'm thinking of flying out. I can be there by tomorrow evening." Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through Arthur's apathy. Sarah couldn't come. She wouldn't understand. She wouldn't see him. She'd see Arthur, unraveled and unkempt, talking to an empty room. She'd try to help, try to fix him. She'd have him committed. No, don't be silly. There's no need, really. I'm just going through a bit of a phase. I'll call you next week, promise. Everything's fine." He ended the call, his hand shaking. The man in the blue suit tilted his head again, that slow, curious gesture. Arthur felt a flush of something akin to shame. Or was it fear of judgment? Not from Sarah, from him. The boundaries were blurring. The man in the blue suit was no longer just an observer. He was a standard, a silent arbiter. Arthur found himself wanting to, not impress him exactly, but to behave in a way that wouldn't elicit, what? Disappointment? Contempt? From a thing that expressed nothing but that damn smile? His descent was quiet, unnoticed by the outside world, save for the increasingly frantic voicemails from his sister. Inside the apartment, however, a strange new dynamic was solidifying. Arthur and his shadow, his reflection, his silent azure companion. One rainy afternoon, much like the day it all began, Arthur was staring out of his window. The city below was awash of gray. He saw the man in the blue suit, not in the room with him, but reflected in the glass, standing beside his own reflection. They looked out together, two figures against the bleak urban sprawl. Arthur thought he saw, for the briefest of instants, the man's smile falter. Just a flicker. A momentary lapse in the otherwise perfect, terrifying composure. Or was it his own reflection, his own mind, desperately seeking any change, any sign? When he focused, the smile was back as unwavering as ever. But the doubt, the possibility, lingered. How does a story like Arthur's end? Does the man in the blue suit ever leave? Does Arthur find a cure, a rational explanation that tucks the horror neatly away? Or does he simply adapt, his reality forever altered, his sanity redefined by the presence of an unwavering, silent observer? There was no dramatic confrontation, no sudden revelation. Life, even a life lived on the precipice of madness, often finds its own strange equilibrium. Arthur stopped fighting. He stopped questioning, at least aloud. The man in the blue suit was a fact of his existence, like the walls of his apartment, like his own breathing. He found a new routine, a quiet, solitary existence, punctuated by the silent presence of his companion. He'd read, and the man would be there, across the room or reflected in a window. He'd make his simple meals, and the man would be in the doorway, watching. He'd sleep, and sometimes wake in the dead of night to find the azure figure at the foot of his bed, a sentinel in the darkness, his pale features barely visible, but the faint upturn of his lips always, somehow, discernible. The fear hadn't entirely vanished. It was a low hum now, a baseline to his existence. But it was no longer the shrieking terror it once was. It was accepted. One morning, Arthur stood before his bathroom mirror. He hadn't shaved in weeks. His eyes were hollow, but they held a strange lucidity. He looked at his reflection, and behind him, of course, stood the man in the blue suit. Their eyes met in the glass. Arthur slowly raised a hand to his own face. He traced the outline of his lips, and then, deliberately, he smiled. It wasn't the pained grimace of before. It was a careful imitation, a studied replication of the man's own expression, slight, fixed, reaching his mouth, but not quite his eyes. He held the smile, looking at their twin reflections, his own disheveled form and the immaculate azure figure beside him. For a long moment, they just stood there, two smiling figures in the dim light of the bathroom. Arthur turned, slowly, to face the man directly. Not his reflection, but the man himself, standing there by the door. The man in the blue suit looked back at him, and for the first time, Arthur thought he saw something different in the man's eyes. Not surprise, not fear, perhaps recognition? Or was it simply his own expression, his own newfound unsettling calm, mirrored back at him? The man's smile didn't change. It never changed. But as Arthur held his own replicated smile, a profound, chilling thought settled in his mind. Perhaps the man in the blue suit wasn't there to drive him mad. Perhaps he was simply waiting for Arthur to finally understand, waiting for him to join in the smile. The line between observer and observed, between sanity and its silent, smiling alternative, had become as thin and as transparent as the glass in which he saw their reflections. Arthur was no longer sure on which side he stood, or if there was even a difference anymore. He was Arthur Penwright, and he was not alone. He was never alone, and in the quiet, shared smile, there was a terrifying, unspoken understanding. The unseen watcher? A chilling concept, isn't it? To have your most private moments under constant, silent scrutiny by an entity only you perceive. Arthur's story leaves us with an unsettling question. When faced with the inexplicable, do we break, or do we adapt in ways that might seem like madness to the outside world, but become a new, twisted form of sanity for ourselves? Is the man in the blue suit an external tormentor, or a manifestation of something already within, waiting for the right cracks to appear? What would you do if you found yourself the sole audience to such a silent, smiling spectator? Thank you for joining us on the Hauntline. If this story resonated with the darker corners of your imagination, please consider supporting our channel. Like this episode if it sent a shiver down your spine. Subscribe to the Hauntline for more journeys into the unsettling and the unknown. And be sure to click that notification bell so you never miss a new tale from the shadows. Share this story with fellow connoisseurs of the creepy and the cerebral. We have many more hauntings to explore, many more minds to unravel. Until next time, try not to look over your shoulder too often. You never know who might be watching and smiling.